Let's go. You lead the way. Where are we headed? Towards a net zero future, of course. Cleaner water, more electricity, a sustainable society. That's the destination we've set ourselves. This we know. Yes, we know exactly where we're going, but we need to get there quicker. So, let's build on the progress we've already made by working and walking together. With the right partners, tools and ideas, we'll become an unstoppable force. This we know. Right now, there are businesses who are putting technology and sustainability at the heart of everything they do. Brave leaders turning maybes into realities and building something better for everyone.
Now is the time for companies to take center stage, to look to the future and reinvent themselves today, empowering others to do the same tomorrow. Yes, we know what the future holds, and we know how to get there. So, let's take charge of the journey today.
Welcome to Unlocking the Promise of Sustainability in Asia Pacific. I'm Michael Lawrence, Chief Executive of Asia House, and I'm delighted to be in discussion with the heads of sustainability from SAP and Accenture on the sidelines of the COP26 summit. Southeast Asia is the region most vulnerable to the physical risks associated with climate change. It also faces the greatest challenges in terms of transition risk. There's now pressure from investors, from young people and government regulators on organizations of all sizes. Organizations now need to recognize the importance of embedding sustainability KPIs into their overall strategy. They need to act. So how do companies drive that change and, crucially, do so without compromising profits? Well, I'm joined now by Andrew Charlton, Managing Director of the Sustainability Services Practice for Accenture across growth markets. He joins us from Sydney, and Anita Varshney, Global Vice President, Strategy and Sustainability of SAP, who's speaking to us from Hong Kong. Thank you both for being with us. Well, to get us underway, let's get an overview from each of you. Andrew, let's start with you. What are some of the challenges that Accenture clients are facing?
Well, thank you, Michael, and good to be with you and Anita for this discussion, and thanks to Asia House for hosting. I think the way you framed it is exactly right. There are lots of new and growing pressures on companies across the Asia Pacific region. Over the last few years, there's been an enormous increase in the interest in ESG from investors, but also from stakeholders beyond investors. We know that consumers are increasingly spending their money with one eye on the sustainability of their consumption, and that brands that have strong sustainability credentials are growing faster than others. We also know, of course, that governments are also making much more focus on sustainability, particularly this year in the lead up to the UN meeting in Glasgow. And employees of businesses as well are another group of stakeholders who are increasingly putting pressure on their companies, especially young employees who want to be part of businesses that can clearly demonstrate their purpose and the good that those companies do in the world. So organizations are faced with ESG pressure from almost every direction. From investors, from customers, from employees, from regulators. And the challenge that companies have, and that's constantly expressed to us, is how do I meet all these new objectives without any let off in the pressure from our traditional objectives, which is to meet our growth and profitability targets. And that is where I think a lot of clients are looking for answers. And as the pressure to do more in ESG increases, they need to find new ways to deliver on those ESG pressures in ways that are more sustainable for their business. And for us at Accenture, we work with clients every day to try and unlock that Gordian knot. And we do it by finding avenues for companies to deliver both purpose and profit. And there are many examples of companies able to do that. For example, there are lots of companies that can see that when they invest in ESG and sustainability outcomes, they get a return on that investment through top line growth, through stronger customer acquisition. A whole range of companies are finding that including ESG in their marketing campaigns, in their communications with customers, is driving their top lines in a way that it never has before. So there's a return there. It's not just money that they're spending to benefit the planet because they have to. It's money that they're spending to benefit the planet because they have to. That's also delivering a financial return. Ditto on efficiencies. Many companies are finding that the more that they get smart about the way that they deliver their ESG outcomes, energy efficiency, waste reduction, etc., the more they can also find financial benefits in doing so. So, our work at Accenture is to try and help companies deliver on both objectives, to find initiatives that drive the top line, increase the bottom line, and also improve the outcomes for profit and purpose.
Thanks very much. A lot to go through there, and I'm very keen to come back to the profit and purpose concept that you're talking about. But Anita, let's go to you now. I'm keen for your view, but particularly on supply chains and what SAP is seeing there.
Thank you also from my side, Michael and Andrew, for joining this panel, which makes so much sense right on the heels of COP26. I think building upon how Andrew outlined the different dynamics, right, the businesses are faced with globally, and looking, translating that some of the supply chain challenges that SAP is helping our customers to go through as we go through this pandemic. I think it's important to, also take those pressures down to ultimately what are the impact areas where our businesses are really striving to, make a difference, make a positive difference, so as to say. And that's where we boil these, these different pressures down to areas like climate action, whether it's circular economy, the social responsibility piece, or if you look at the entire piece of ESG reporting. And that's where it hits the nail on the target when you talk about supply chain. Because customers can't just do this in silos, that they look at their sustainability strategy in a siloed way. In fact, the operations are so global these days that no region is left behind. And that's where we see that if you have to really scale your impact across your entire supply chain, that means you systematically start up with a target, like what are the targets that you're looking at the pressures coming externally or internally. And then how do you really translate those targets down to your business units, down to your regions, where you can actually strive and make a change possible. And I think that's where the partnership between SAP and Accenture is very unique, because not only you're looking the problem from an outside in perspective, but also really trying to understand that what does it really mean for the underlying business processes, the underlying data, which can help our customers to really drive that change. And if I just take one simple example, right, if you look at the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, right, today, in the next few weeks, we will have the governments committing to their own climate actions. Now, how that translates down to the private sector, it's where we can help them with the data and the underlying transparency, they can move forward on those targets. And if you translate that to the supply chain, then you have a look at what is happening in the developed countries versus developing countries, and appropriately measure and put those targets in. Because ultimately you want to, contribute to your climate goals, but in an equitable way. And looking also at the regional impact which goes along with, taking some of these climate measures. So more on that, Michael, later, but back to you.
Thank you very much, Anita. Let's move now back to Andrew. Andrew, give us some real life examples, because you talked very positively about including ESG targets in marketing material. You talked about, transition to clean energy but give us some real world examples of how this is working, how it's delivering, the purpose with profits.
Well, I think every day we're seeing companies make new announcements, and lots of those targets are very significant. We've seen companies make net zero commitments by 2050. We've seen companies make net zero commitments earlier than that. I think the things that are the best examples for me are those companies that are not just making long-term commitments on climate, but are also making near-term trajectories that are concrete and credible as well. So, it's one thing to make a promise out in 2050, but it's another thing to say that you'll achieve some near-term milestones over the next 5 to 10 years that put you on a strong pathway towards that. And so I think some of the best examples of companies that are doing that are companies that have made significant commitments by 2025, for example, to shift entirely to renewable energy. Those companies that have fleets to shift all of their vehicles to renewables. Companies that have significant exposure in waste to shift all of that waste into a zero waste paradigm across their entire business. There are lots of near-term examples of companies making big and credible commitments in the short term. Now, I don't want to pretend that for every company the path to net zero is fully known right now. There are lots of companies where there is significant uncertainty. Think about the aviation industry.
Yeah.
The aviation industry can promise that they'll get to net zero by 2050 all they like.
Yeah.
But the truth is that pathway is not clear. There are ideas for things that might work in the future. There's sustainable aviation fuels has a promise. Purchasing carbon offsets is obviously an option on the table for part of those emissions. Greater fuel efficiency in the fleet. But the truth is that we have a lot of very significant technological advances that will be required to make aviation sustainable, and we're just not there yet. But I think those companies that are doing a good job are the companies that acknowledge some uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
There are issues that we don't yet know how we will solve. But in the areas where we do have the technology or the ability to address the sustainability challenge, they front load those and do those first. And the companies that are doing that, I think, are the ones that have the most credible pathways, and consumers are responding most strongly too.
Anita, how's this play out across Asia Pacific? Because obviously, different economies, emerging economies, different part of the economic cycle, some much harder hit by COVID, some much more reliant on fossil fuels, a young population in some cases. So a whole lot of different circumstances in the developed economies. What are you seeing? What's SAP seeing from organizations in those emerging economies in Asia Pacific?
So let me start from where Andrew also built upon the profit coming together with purpose, right? And, traditionally, this topic has been approached from a risk and a compliance perspective. And if you see that, especially in APJ, Asia, you would see a lot of risk and compliance being front-ended by all these companies where they're saying that this is an absolute must from a compliance perspective, from the business risk perspective, that we are putting these targets on top of our agenda. If you see, many customers have actually tied in sustainability directly to the CFO's team. And that is a very, very big shift, because then it becomes a top priority for a CFO to pursue sustainability, which, bringing it to the heart of their strategy. So I think having this dimension tied it very closely to the finance goes, a big, big way. Now, if you look at what is happening in APJ in Asia, here is where we are seeing, I think Andrew mentioned some of the areas where, of course, it will come from a compliance perspective. But if you look, for example, where you already have the underlying policies available, right? If you look, one of the areas that SAP and Accenture is working on is responsible design and production. And, if you look at the EPR taxation, some of the countries already have, like Malaysia, they have a plastics pact in place, right? So you will have some countries who have already taken, a leading charge and let's say no plastics. How do we protect our countries? And that's where it exactly ties back to the youth that you're talking about. The number of ideas that are germinating from startups, right? From the core, bottom up, there have been, a huge, huge scale happening in APJ. And the good thing is businesses are ready to take on those ideas and embed them in. One of the conversations that we're having with the World Economic Forum is on the plastics pact that we have with the different countries around the world. And it is so visible that the businesses are ready to embed these ideas from their startups, so that they are able to scale the ideas in the not only the developed countries, but take the emerging countries also side by side. So you would see some of the policies and taxes are already helping, countries move much faster in Asia. And if you look at a topic like ESG reporting, Michael, that is something which is universal to all. And that is where we would see if IFRS is mandating the ISSB board to be formed and we have these disclosures coming in, that is again brings a very leveling field for every country, for every every business in whatever country they are, they must meet those targets. So I think while the businesses need to do their homework to move forward, it's also exemplary to see what the standard makers are doing by consolidating efforts from their side. For those who are in these emerging countries, they can make better sense out of what is compliance perspective, what is ambitious for me, and what is possible within the realms of the resources which I have at my disposal today.
I do want to get back to that taxonomy issue in a moment, but Andrew, to you first. And Anita made the point that with some organizations, this is owned, at least initially, by the CFO, so it's in the finance function. But is it a case now that KPIs right across an organization need to be designed to deliver these sorts of targets? Is it owned by the board? Is it owned by the executive? Is it owned by every single individual in an organization?
I think it's increasingly, as Anita said, owned right through the organization. And I think that's part of the maturity curve of sustainability. I think it sort of started down the bottom of the curve with investor relations, who are responsible for putting out a sustainability report and explaining to investors the various things that companies were doing. Then it moved to the CFO as sort of money started to be spent on this issue and the CEO started to get interested. But as we mature into the phase of real delivered action in mitigation, this agenda will have to spread right through the organization, because sustainability is not an issue that is solved with the stroke of a pen in the CEO's office or the CFO's office. It's something that's solved at an operational level right through the business. And that's why the work of SAP is so important, to be able to provide the data that is the lifeblood of these organizations, making sure that they can measure all of these sustainability outcomes by collecting the right data. And then once they can measure it, they can monitor it. And once they can monitor it, they can change it. And that requires data coming into the organization, measuring all the things that matter across the ESG landscape, putting that data in the hands of every part of the business that's responsible for this change and supporting them on that change journey.
Anita, I mean, that's a great point. The data is essential to deliver these targets, needs to go across an organization. But there is a debate, is there not, about what the taxonomy will be. There's no global standard. It doesn't look like we're close to a global standard. And there are a few what I'd call competing pushes for taxonomy. How are you grappling with that? And how are you advising your clients to grapple with that?
So, Michael, that's a great question. Andrew gave an example of why that transition path is very important, because whatever happens in 2050, that's down the line, right? And this transition path is where, I think it's a critical idea that companies work together with SAP and Accenture, where we can go down into this business process level or the operational level, as Andrew just mentioned. And while we are trickling down, what we realized early on 2 years back is when we devised the SDG Ambition approach together with Accenture, is companies really struggle to really understand that where do I actually start this journey? Who owns these KPIs? Where is the governance set? And what is the ambitious targets that I lay out myself to? And that's where I think this consultative guide, which has now, I think, 700 companies coming in for the second round, will really help companies to really understand what that path looks like. And it's during that path, Michael, you're really right to see that, it is this process that I need to change. And here is where the data is coming from the underlying systems. Now, when you see it, what is happening externally, the taxonomy, as you rightly said, many of them are competing. But it is one thing to say that let them compete, let them come out with a standard, and then we would be ready to report. Or we start looking internally and say, here is my biggest impact, and this is how I need to really start to see where my data lies. Is it, the reuse of materials that I'm looking at? Is it the social responsibility piece that I'm looking at? Because the start of the journey itself, Michael, the first few, months, it's all about discovering, do I even capture the data? And Michael, we are coming from a world where this data was never important, right? We didn't care about, what is happening outside the boundaries of my company as long as I'm making profits. So traditionally, companies are not meant to run and gather this data in a huge scale amount of time, right? They have been doing this investor side of reporting, as Andrew said, which is collecting data, massaging data, having a report out there, and doing that yearly exercise. And now we are really challenging them and saying, what happens if you do this on a monthly basis? And they're like, oh, that data, I don't really have it anywhere. And that's where I am like, the taxonomy, that would take its time. And I think the speed has been tremendous this year. But businesses on our side, we can start to see where's the data that actually want to measure impact and show our progress. And Michael, let's face it, the data won't be good. Let's face that data. Let's face that ugly side of data and say, this is how we strive to drive change. And that's where the conversations with our clients are on. Understanding the data where they have the impact, understanding the complexity, the roles of people collecting and reporting on data. And finally, what does it take to actually steer the data in the right positive ESG direction, which was never the earlier objective, but what does that journey looks like? And we are doing this hand in hand, knowing how the external standard makers are moving so that the progress from both the sides, probably would converge in the coming few months.
I see. So are you seeing that too, Andrew, that your clients are looking at gathering, regardless of the taxonomy issue and the taxonomy debate, they have to start gathering data. They have to start looking at what they need to do. They have to start making operational changes based on the data they're gathering. And at some point, the taxonomy and what they're doing will converge.
I think that's absolutely right. The first challenge is for them to identify what data they need, and that does vary across different companies. There's obviously a lot of attention right now on climate and commitments to reduce emissions, and that in itself involves a whole range of different data sets. But across the ESG landscape, there are also many other areas, from modern slavery and human rights to labour rights to compensation, diversity, a range of governance metrics, a number of other categories of environmental issues beyond emissions. So for each company, it really starts with their ESG strategy. And that means determining what are the issues that matter to them. And that's going to be different for every company. It's going to be very different for a healthcare company than it is for an airline. And then from that, the companies need to decide, well, what do they need to measure then? If their particular issues are climate and human rights, then what are the things they need to measure? And then from there, they can then build their data systems against their priorities. But it starts with an ESG strategy. And I think that's where we are on the maturity curve for lots of companies. They're starting to set out what their strategy is, working out what their issues are, determining their targets. And we're going to move from that into a phase which is going to be much more data intensive. And we're going to move from the setting of targets to the monitoring of progress against those targets. And that will be a much data hungry and systems intensive phase of the ESG journey, which is why this topic is so current and so important in boardrooms and C-suites right now.
And I guess there's a difference, Andrew, just sticking with that having a strategy is one thing. Implementing against that strategy should accelerate progress. And I guess there's also a difference between those organizations that are seriously bought into this and those that are doing it because there's implied or real pressure from investors. Do you see a distinction between those sorts of organizations, those who really believe in this and are embedding it, and those who are going through it because they feel they need to?
Absolutely. Right now we're in the golden age of greenwashing. And the reason for that is that every company feels the pressure to look like they are doing sustainable things and being a sustainable company. But it's actually very hard for consumers, investors, governments to distinguish between the companies that are walking the walk and those that are just talking the talk.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, there are a lot of companies out there that are saying a lot more than they're doing. My view is that we will move through that phase, and the greenwashing era will be a moment in time. And the way that we move through that phase is exactly what Anita's been talking about. As we get more data, the ability for consumers and investors to distinguish between the companies that are saying they're going to do all the right things and the companies that are actually doing the right things will increase. the ability for companies to hide behind some slogans and some nice words and some targets long off into the future, well after they've all retired, will diminish. And so, I think there are lots of companies that are realizing that now the time for action is here, and that's going to involve a big change in the way they approach these issues.
Anita, I see you nodding furiously at that. Do you also see a distinction between those who are grabbing the opportunity and those who are just paying lip service to it?
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more to Andrew on this fact. Like, if, you would soon have auditors knocking at your door saying that it's no longer enough to show you just a yearly report. Can you go down to the details and show me what happens in this region versus the other? Because let's face it, it's not easy that you can have a blanket approach. And all companies, they have global operations, Michael. You would have, what happens in Brazil is very different what happens in Philippines, right? What are the laws around plastics waste, or what are the laws around social responsibility, human labor, right? So because of the various different laws and regulations which go as per the country and the underlying complexity and how we approach them, it's so different, right? So unless you are able to really show those commitments, even if it's a small scale, I think be honest to that, and I think that shows a commitment that the company is ready to scale on their sustainability objectives. Well, they start small, but the path is clear, and I think that really matters, Michael. Even to, if you say the profits and the purpose, the picture coming together, it's more credible, right, to your customers, to your employees. And that's where you would see this greenwashing completely going away, because you see the real commitment in that. So I think this is very, very current, and I think this would only grow more serious as the movement continues from both the businesses as well as the employees.
And if I want to stay with you, because you mentioned there social responsibility, what are some of the initiatives you're seeing in that space, in the sort of the sustainable initiatives and social responsibility?
Absolutely. So, Michael, of course, social responsibility has taken a little bit backseat because it's all about climate, and then we talk about materials. But I think soon, very soon, we will have even the EU. They are drawing out the social charter, right? What does the social charter looks like? How can companies be measured? Because unless you're really measuring and putting the metrics in place, the companies are not really taking action. So what we are seeing here is within the boundaries of your organization, they're taking care of employees, their health and their well-being. But then it comes what happens to the community that you are impacting with your products, with your services, and then the bigger circle about the whole planet. So there are companies who are looking at these three different circles, right? What are we doing within our own operations, with the community, and then with the planet? So what we see is, of course, within your own boundaries, it's a little bit easier to define that how do you take care of your employees. And that itself has become so transparent in the pandemic, right? It is so transparent on how you are dealing with your teams. Look at your workforce, and then slowly to start to give back to the community. And that's where, again, we will see a shift, Michael, from just, doing a CSR project for an XYZ community, but actively working with that community hand in hand, because they are a part of your larger ecosystem. They are impacted by your services. And what does it mean in a long term? That this community is actually a part of your larger business. So I think what you would see is the shift from the CSR-led projects to be more well-intended projects towards your own employees, towards your community. And then when you go to the bigger dimension, right, whether it's the reforestation, whether it's the carbon offset, it's all about that. What is your bigger impact on the planet? So I think the social responsibility, as we see maturity coming in the laws and the regulations, we will also see companies being more responsible as we come out of this pandemic.
Andrew, I want to turn now to what's called sustainable talent. What actually is sustainable talent? What does that mean?
Well, the sustainability challenge that many companies are facing is ultimately a very human challenge. As you said and Anita said earlier in this conversation, it is not something that can be done by the CFO alone. It has to be done right through the organization. And as it's done right through the organization, that means upskilling that organization in sustainability. And in many ways, shifting the paradigm of the for-profit business, which most of us have lived under for the majority of our working lives, towards a different paradigm. And we shouldn't underestimate the scale of that change. It's a cultural change as much as anything else. And so, bringing in sustainability skills right across a business is an essential prerequisite to delivering on the sustainability journey that many companies are promising, and particularly have promised in the last few months leading up to the Glasgow summit. That is a multidimensional problem, but it involves reskilling the entire workforce with the basic skills around sustainability, being able to use the type of sustainability data that Anita's been referencing in this conversation, and being able to act on that in a way that drives real change in whatever part of the organisation they work in. But it also means bringing in specialist sustainability talent to solve particular problems that companies might have. So this human challenge is an enormous part of the sustainability journey, and without it, we just won't succeed.
Anita, I want to finish with you and the Asia Pacific region in particular. What are some of the levers that you're seeing that will allow a culture of sustainable innovation to thrive in Asia Pacific and organizations operating there?
So I think it very nicely ties back to what Andrew said. It is ultimately about humans, right? How we are closely connected to sustainability. And I think this kind of reskilling is something I think Asia actually is, culture is really adapted to. And why do I say that, Michael? Because we will need specialists, absolutely. But for the entire organization to go through such a cultural shift, you need to have a continuous learning attitude, right? If the SBTi targets are only going to be announced next week, I need to prepare myself. What does the sectoral guidance look like? Now, this has all been developing as we are going towards, these different sustainability challenges, and how each of the employees have this continuous learning attitude, whether it is from the competitors, from their customers, from the standard makers. I think, and then bring that back to the core of what they do, whether it's procurement, whether it's the supply chain, whether it's finance. And then that's where you see sustainability to really start embedding into companies' DNA. And when you look at the Asia Pac, right, here, I think by nature, we have this attitude of, always going beyond and delivering beyond. And I think that's where you would see truly, Asia coming out, as a leader, because we are ready with the innovators, we have the ideas, and more importantly, we have the energy and the spirit to really start executing on the sustainability challenges. So I think there's a very promising, way ahead for us in Asia. And I look forward, how we are seeing in the next couple of months, Asia really driving this from a perspective of, being a leader in this space.
Tremendous. Look, I'm afraid we're out of time, but it's a good note to finish on, Asia being the leader in this space. Look, it's a fantastic conversation. Thank you both very much. An extraordinary time, a time of change, a time of a paradigm change happening. We're in the midst of it. So very exciting, but lots of challenges ahead. So Andrew Charlton, thank you very much. Anita Varshney, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for listening. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you soon. I'm Michael Lawrence. Bye for now.